on today's Edge of Wonder.
How would you guys like a world exclusive of something very classified?
Riveting revelations from David Wilcock.
It is unbelievable.
And the questions of a dark agenda behind the California wildfires in this exclusive interview.
This is crazy, okay?
But what does crazy look like?
If you see them in their native form.
And why would the deep state be concerned with who they are?
One of the names that I've heard used for them, and I've heard this for many years.
And it's a name you may have thought you knew. In an exclusive interview you can't miss on the Edge of Wonder. Buckle in, because it looks like we're in for yet another mind-blowing thrill ride.
There will be a massive avalanche event of awakening, and it's coming soon.
In part one of this David Wilcock exclusive.
Welcome to Edge of Wonder. We have a great episode for you guys with our very special guest, Mr. David Wilcock.
David, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you guys for bringing me on.
Hey, so we actually wanted to start off by asking you a little bit of a personal question, just about how you actually started with all of this. Like, why did you start looking into this and researching it? What compelled you to actually get into the disclosure field and start trying to figure out what was really going on in this crazy planet?
Well, I've had dreams about this kind of paranormal stuff for my entire life. Ever since I was 2 years old, I had dreams about things that kind of looked like airplanes. They were cylindrical, but they didn't have wings. And they would kind of flutter like an insect over the ground. And I would have multiple dreams, quote unquote, where I was seeing these in the backyard at my house. I also would have dreams in which there was a being who I was speaking to. And I was born in 1973. And after I saw Star Wars in 1977, I was 4 years old and saw it in the theater, didn't know what to expect. It blew me away. And the being in my dreams actually became Obi-Wan Kenobi. And yeah, it was really fascinating because he actually in some ways felt more like a father to me than my own parents did. And he was telling me that in the future, I would become very famous, that I had a spiritual mission on the planet, that the mission was very important, and that we would all be transforming somehow during my lifetime, that I would see this transformation. So that was a very compelling thing, and at age 5, I had an out-of-body experience, which I've talked about in my books and pretty extensively. I woke up floating over my body, seeing myself sleeping, and this was really a phenomenal experience to have. And I floated down the hallway and then went down the stairs. I felt like I was being observed, and then I got scared thinking I was dying, that the next step was to fly out of my house and up into space, and I wouldn't be coming back. And at that point, I had this big surge of fear, and I snapped back into my body really fast. And it was in the aftermath of that that I became ignited with this quest, thinking that I would meet this Obi-Wan Kenobi father character in these craft if I had gone on that trip, and I wanted another chance. So for 2 years, every night I asked for another chance and nothing was happening. So when I was 7 years old, I told my mother about this, and she showed me these books that we had under the cellar staircase on bookshelves, and she told me that what I was trying to do was called E.S.P, Extrasensory Perception. So I actually read an adult book on E.S.P when I was 7 years old by Harold Sherman called How to Make E.S.P Work for You. And so the psychic aspect of my life was very important, and I've just been doing paranormal research ever since, really. That was the first adult book I read when everybody else at the time was reading something called Clifford the Big Red Dog, where the text is like an inch tall in the book, you know. That I'm reading this adult stuff with no pictures.
Man, that's an awesome story.
You know,
that you started that early.
Yeah, I to be honest, it's almost very similar to my own story. Like I had really crazy experiences as well, and dreams and kind of things visiting me as well. We won't get into that right now, but actually, and Rob and I were talking about this not too long ago, where the first book that I checked out at the library, I was in second grade, was The Lost City of Atlantis, and a book on the Bermuda Triangle. And I've been like into this stuff ever since. So it's kind of interesting.
I just watched Goonies a lot.
So yeah, I feel like we were all on this path for a reason, and we all have a purpose and a destiny, I guess, with this.
You have two fires show up simultaneously right after a mass shooting, where the one in Southern California, the mass shooting is just a couple miles away from where the fire starts. And so then you see that because there's also a fire in Northern California that's even worse, that they have to take all these resources and throw them up to the north so they can't fight the fire in the south. And at the same time, we've now learned that they had these planes called super tankers that can literally do, you know, football fields wide of a curtain of water for miles and completely destroy a wildfire. And they've been used in many other countries. You can just go scoop it out of the ocean, fly over, drop the stuff down, go scoop another one, fly over, drop it down, and it will completely destroy that fire. And yet, because of red tape and because of, we got to approve it and authorize it, and it's all caught up in red tape, they were sitting on the tarmac and they were never used. As literally the entire left side of all the vegetation in LA and Ventura County was completely burned. And I've been out here in Los Angeles to see this, and it is unbelievable. If you haven't lived here, if you don't actually know about what this is like and where this burned, I can tell you this: there has never been something like this in LA before. It's unbelievable. The scope of the devastation is unbelievable, and it's so much worse than an earthquake, because even in an earthquake, a bad earthquake, right, there's still a house standing there, usually. There's some kind of structure. Maybe you got to repair some of your foundation, or maybe some walls collapse, but you still have a house. A wildfire is even worse than a massive earthquake because it just burns it right down to the ash. Unbelievable. And then you got to ask yourself again, was this a satanic ritual? Did they perform a sacrifice, a blood sacrifice, with the Thousand Oaks shooting, okay? With an obvious mind-controlled military veteran shooter, you know, in the military, lots of people end up going through this kind of MK Ultra stuff in military service. And then 3 hours later, more or less, is when this fire starts. It's too suspicious, because it looks to me like first they do the blood sacrifice, then they did the sacrificial fire. And it's all part of this weird cult, which again, if you follow what's going on with QAnon, these guys are losing. They're losing fast. There is an alliance. I know that it's existing because I've met people in it. I've been getting briefings on it since 2009, way before the Q stuff started last year. And you can't dispute that this alliance is real, and that we're going to see indictments getting unsealed. We're going to see people getting put away. There will be a massive avalanche event of awakening, and it's coming soon.
David, let me ask you a question related to this. This is really what we wanted to talk to you about, a lot of it. And what we've noticed is that in our research, where modern people fail is we are too naive to see all of the different things that are connecting that actually lead to, for instance, the California wildfires. As an example, if you actually dig in and you research serial killers, and you research all of the things that were going on around the serial killers, you actually start finding a narrative that actually points to satanic rituals, satanic ritual abuse, these kinds of things. But all the information they're telling you is exactly basically that it was just this crazy case of this little boy misunderstanding things, growing up weird, and then going crazy and killing people when they get older. It couldn't be further from the truth.
And it's completely isolated from everything else. Doesn't relate to anything else.
Exactly. But when you really start looking into it, and for the California wildfires especially, if you start looking into what was going on around the California wildfires, like what you stated, what was going on in Florida with the election and all of that stuff.
Well, and then at the same time, you have the whole immigrant caravan.
The immigrants, the caravan
same
stuff.
time happening.
I mean, it's a huge distraction. I mean, what do you have to say to people who have a hard time putting those things together? I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. You know this better than anyone. I mean, how can we wake more people up by helping them see the patterns in these things?
Well, and right before you answer that, so recently I've been getting messages from some fans on Facebook who live in California and are affected by these wildfires, and they're telling me, like, I've been through a lot of wildfires being in California, and this is the strangest one I've ever seen. Bar none. And they're like convinced. I mean, I'm getting a few messages like this. They're convinced that, they're showing me photos of like the fire, and then you're seeing also photos where it's like one side of the street is fine, the other side is like, it seems like it's almost like being selective. And
cars are melting. Cars melt at like 3,000 degrees centigrade, the metal, like that is, wildfires don't do that. Like there's weird stuff going on.
And then it'll affect one car and it seems to almost like kind of skip over other cars. But anyway, they're also trying to like, this just seems too weird for me. And they're just like, they wanted us to look into this. And I was like, well, great, we can ask David Wilcock what he thinks about this as well.
How would you guys like a world exclusive of something very classified?
Hit us! Bring it!
This is crazy, okay? Because ever since about, I guess, 2007, I've been in touch with this particular insider who called himself Henry Deacon with Project Camelot. You guys probably remember that. And he was the first person to really educate me about the secret space program. He had a base that he would go to work at in the UK, and he would have to talk to people at a desk when he got towards the end of this thing, and they would make sure that he was normal in the way that he talked, and then he would go down this hallway called the corridor, a big round tunnel, and then at the end of the tunnel was an elevator, and he would use a key, a typical house key, and they said it would reduce psychological impact to do it this way. He would turn the key in the elevator, the door would close, and when the door would open, he claimed that he was on Mars. And it was a portal system. Now, he was working within a world in which he would apparently drive to work, park at this military base, walk through the corridor, take the elevator takes him to Mars, he does shifts on Mars, he comes back and he goes home in the UK, okay? A lot of weird stuff that he told me, including the fact that there were 200,000 personnel on this Mars base, but only 10,000 of them were actually born on Earth. One of the things that he told me early along that I found really surprising was that the people that he was talking to that were not born on Earth, nonetheless, for the most part, looked very human-like. Some of them had skin that was kind of a pastel pink. Some of them looked pastel yellow, some of them looked green, orange, blue, light blue, dark blue. Some people had jet black skin, like really jet black. And there was all different variations of people who looked more or less like us, but something's a little off, here, there, or the otherwise. There were certain things that he and others have told me over the years that I absolutely was not ever going to disclose. And there's a variety of reasons for that. My goal is not just to wow people with fantastic sounding information. I really do observe the secrecy for the protection of my insiders. I want to never break confidentiality. I want to be that guy who has integrity, so you can come to me with information and trust that unless you ask me to make it go public, it's not going anywhere. And that's how I've been able to do this so long, and that's how I've gotten so many insiders on my side. You're not going to hear any real, true story. You might get disinformation, but there's not going to be a true story about me betraying somebody. Okay, that's the preface. Now let's get into the meat of this thing. Some of the humans that they deal with routinely in our military-industrial complex are people who look pretty much just like us. And they might have subtle differences, but not that many. Now, one of the people, I've been tracking this group for many, many years, okay? And I'm going to give you guys some new stuff that nobody's heard about these folks before. These are people who look like us for the most part. The men are really buff. They have really strong looking bodies. They might be a little bit taller than we are. And if you see them the way they naturally would look, their skin is pretty darn pale. It's a little bit too pale, like it looks a little bit too white. And they have white hair, which is another strange thing. If you see them in their native form, their eyes will either be a dark blue or a violet color, which we do not have. And then another interesting thing is that their pupil is kind of like a diamond shape. It's not reptilian, it's not this vertical slit, but it's a diamond instead of round, okay? So that's gonna look a little creepy, a little weird. Another thing about them is that they have a little bit of a serrated edge on the bottom of their teeth, and they have fewer teeth in their mouth than we do. I believe they only have 22 teeth. They kind of have this little scalloped edge on the bottom of their teeth, and also they have a scalloped roof of their mouth. Like our soft palate in the top of our mouth is flat. Theirs is like a cat. It has ridges, really thick, deep ridges. Now these people supposedly, at least what they've claimed, is that they came from Alpha Centauri. So one of the names that I've heard used for them, and I've heard this for many years, is Centaurians, okay? So they are the Centaurians. And there apparently have been treaties where the Centaurians are allowed to walk around in our everyday world. One of the people who has actually talked about this is Paul Hellyer, the former Canadian Minister of Defense, in which he's talking about these people being authorized to walk around in Nevada. And maybe even, there's one case he talks about where they were dressed up like nuns. And so the nun, you know, with the habit and everything, they look a little different. Now normally the Centaurians are going to wear contact lenses to hide especially if they have the violet color of their eyes, but definitely the pupils too. They have to wear a snap-in dental plate to hide the serration on the bottom of their teeth, and they might also wear foundational makeup to hide how pale their skin is. Now, it's with heavy heart that I have to talk about this, because I knew from Henry Deacon all the way back in 2007 that there was a city, a small town in America, the most important small town in America, in which there was a treaty, a secret treaty with the Centaurians, who, by the way, are non-violent. They're not evil. They're good people. They're actually, if you get to talk to them, they will look you in the eye, and you don't speak. You don't move your mouth. They don't move their mouth. But you have this incredible conversation, and you feel incredibly high. You actually get this like very powerful, euphoric, drug-like effect just from being in their presence. So there was a treaty, and I was notified about this in 2007, and I've heard about this town ever since from 3 or 4 different insiders, and you probably can see where this is going. Paradise, California. Paradise, California is a name I've been hiding for 11 years. And it's the most important small town in the United States where these people were being given safe haven and refuge. Now, there's some weird stuff, okay, that I'm going to tell you, including the fact that Paradise had dentists who were trained in how to treat their teeth because, of course, with the serrated bottom and the wideness, the teeth are wider than ours, and there's fewer of them. And I think there's also something funny about the root structure. They can't just get a normal dentist. Obviously, the dentist would flip out and lose his mind. So they had special people living in Paradise who knew about these folks and were trained on how to handle them and how to deal with them, right? People are going to ask me, how many of these Centaurians were living in Paradise? And the answer is I don't know. From the briefings I've gotten, and this is absolute speculation, it's only a guess, and I would say it's probably at least 500. It might even be a few thousand, I don't really know. What I do know is that I was going to visit Paradise, California at some point. I'd planned on it, and I've never talked about this before. This is a world exclusive, okay? And I'm not making this up. I've got recordings with Henry Deacon going back to 07, 08, 09 that I could dig out where we're talking about Paradise, California. This is nothing new. And I've had 3 other insiders confirm that these treaties exist, and that the only 2 cities like this in America were Paradise and someplace in Nevada that we don't even know exactly where it is. So why would this happen? Why would the most important city in America for human extraterrestrials burn down so fast that people died in their car trying to pull out of the driveway, right? And the question that I want to know is, were we on the verge of a disclosure event? Were we on the verge of these Centaurians introducing themselves to us collectively? And did that possibility so anger the cabal that they said, we'll show you guys? Because I've seen photographs, and I'm going to have it in my article if I can dig them up again, of laser beams coming down, igniting these fires. You can see the beam through the smoke and the flames. This was not an accident. This is the HARP stuff where they can create a very fast blowing wind, the Santa Ana wind, which is originally Satana, the satanic wind, right? And they just changed the name to Santa Ana. There is no Saint Anna, you know, they just didn't want it to be Satanas, which is what it was originally called, Satan, because it blows fire. So the Paradise thing is really upsetting because we've never seen a city get so devastated in the history of America. And so many of these people who are totally innocent and were probably getting ready to risk their lives and come forward and introduce themselves to us, probably many of them have died. And it's also like the cabal saying, if you guys talk again, if you think you're going to talk again, we're going to do this to you again. So I find the whole thing very, very sad.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is just shocking.
So Paradise, so what you're telling us is Paradise City has been decimated completely.
Well, now, they may not have all gotten hit. And I'll tell you another weird thing about the Centaurians. They can't really live above the ground for too long on Earth. They like it here, and of course Paradise, you got redwood trees, you got the forest. It's an amazing wilderness paradise. That's why they named it Paradise, because it was so beautiful. So it would make sense that these people, if they get a treaty, that they would want to live in such a beautiful place, right? The part that we don't really see, though, is that predominantly they live in an underground base. And so what they will have, and again, I'm sorry, because this is going to sound like sci-fi, and you're going to have these people, the keyboard jockeys, they're going to be like, David Wilcock, he's so crazy, right? I'm just going to tell you what I know. You can laugh. If sometimes you need to laugh to learn the truth, you know. But they predominantly live in underground bases, and so they will, as part of the treaty, they might be given a house, but then the house will have an elevator shaft that will actually go deep down and then go down to one of these sub-shuttles where they can shuttle over to their underground city. So the house is not necessarily where they live all the time. But then the question is, can they get to their elevator fast enough to get down below where the fire is? How many of them actually died? How many of them burned up? I don't know. You know, the Alliance is in the middle of what they call active operations right now, the final stage of getting ready to defeat the Cabal, so the briefings have dried up. But I would imagine a lot of Centaurians died in this fire, and they couldn't act fast enough because literally, as I said, people are trying to evacuate, and the fire was so fast they didn't even have time to make it to their car.
Wow, very interesting.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
And just for the record, people on our show that subscribe are gonna totally buy that elevator story. They're not gonna be jockeying.
Well, our fans, yeah, probably.
They're just, right now they're at home like this.
Like we are too. So, David, real quick, I'm trying to remember, because we actually did a series on different, an alien, we did 2 alien guide videos, which I thought it was the Centaurians, but maybe I'm getting confused now. Which one was it that you said they were like really big and buff, but if you find out about them, they might like follow you or something, and they were working within the government?
Centaurians, yes.
like, what's the difference between like this group of Centaurians and the ones that basically? I mean, from my understanding too, there could be some that are working with the Cabal, and then some that are, you know, just trying to live very peaceful and maybe just studying the human race or whatnot.
So I'm glad you brought that up because it is an opportunity for me to make some clarifications. So first of all, it's very rare that you would see a Centaurian walking around in public, unless it was Paradise, California, without a military escort. And this is going to be a guy who is roided out. You know, he's going to have the big steroid face, the acromegaly where his head is really big, his jaw is really big, he's really overly strong. So you're going to see a roided out military contractor dude walking around kind of on the periphery with the Centaurian. There's nothing that would stop him from wearing a wig or dyeing their hair, so you're not necessarily going to see him with white hair. I did hear that they were also cleared by treaty to interact with the farmers markets in California. So for whatever reason, if you go to the farmers market in LA and you see somebody who's really strong and looks kind of pale, you know, that could be one of them. Now, when I asked about this, because I get a very different version of the Centaurians from, for example, Corey Goode and a couple others than I got from Henry Deacon. And it took me a while to figure out this is all the same group. Now, let's also be clear, these are not the Anshar. They are not the inner Earth civilizations that we're talking about, even though they do have certain underground bases. This is not the so-called fourth density people that Corey was talking to as the Anshar. It's a totally different group. And also another thing that people have gotten very confused about is that there really is not, you know, the names that the military-industrial complex gave various ET races were not exact. And so when you hear the term tall whites, there's a few different types of ETs that could be called tall whites. And so it is not like, oh, well, he's talking about the tall whites. I know about tall whites, and Charles Hall did the whole thing, and I know what they are, and they look like grays. It's like, no. There's lots of different tall whites, okay? They just call you that because you're tall and your skin is white. So like the various insectoid races, they might call them the crickets, they might call them the bugs, they might call them the mantis people. They have different names for them, but there could be a lot of different types of insectoids too, you know? So, and again, this is all stuff that people are gonna be learning. They might laugh right now. Your audience, the core audience, probably doesn't. But anything that you see on Earth, if you can imagine it being progressed forward to the point that it is hominid and intelligent, you can imagine that those types of beings exist somewhere, because that's really what it is. The biosphere of a planet pretty much stays the same as what we have here, but it then depends on which species gets elevated to intelligent life, at which point it's going to have the hominid head, 2 arms, 2 legs, or so-called 5-star formation. So, getting back to these tall whites, getting back to the Centaurians and the core of what you were asking me, if you're dealing with some of the military-minded Centaurians, the folks who are here for sort of like their national defense, those types, or national, nation, race, whatever you want to call it, okay, it's probably not a nation. The defense types, yes, you do not want them to know that you recognize them. You probably would get telepathically tracked. You probably would get abducted, and then they would actually be able to give you a splice and a mind wipe where you don't remember ever seeing them, and you don't remember the contact or the abduction experience. Now, they're not going to torture you, but they're going to blank slate you and you're not going to remember it. And they do this pretty frequently, so it's not a good idea to go looking for Centaurians. I'm going to go to the farmer's market now every weekend, you know, look for these white guys. You know? I wouldn't do that. But there's other types of people, because they have all different types of social strata, and the ones that were living in paradise appear to be the more peaceful types of Centaurians. One of the things Henry Deacon told me is they hate crowds. It's like too much psychic interference. They don't want to be around a lot of people. So if you were going to see them in paradise, they would typically be like at the back corner of a coffee shop, sitting alone, and you might have a conversation with them where you never look at them. You sit near them at a different table, and you have this whole telepathic thing going on, a very entertaining and blissful conversation, and then at the end you might just turn to them and kind of smile and give them a nod, and otherwise you might not even look at them. So it's like any culture, they're complicated. It's not like there's simple little boxes you can put them in. Another thing I can tell you that's another world exclusive for you guys, and again, you know, the people are going to laugh, and I apologize, but Centaurians are very psychic. And so one of the things that they have for entertainment is treaties where they will go from their underground home to this base under Las Vegas. They'll take elevators up. They'll close down certain casinos at certain times. They'll take elevators up from the base into the casino, which most of these casinos have those, because there's a lot of relationship between casinos and the military-industrial complex, actually, and the mafia. So they'll bring these Centaurians and certain other human ET groups up into the casino. And then what they do is literally like a psychic Olympics, in which they are competing with each other to cheat in these Vegas games like roulette, poker, you name it. Who is better at being able to psychically pick each other's cards? Who is better at being able to manipulate where the little roulette ball goes? How the dice roll if you're playing craps? And they know that everybody's cheating, but it's this kind of ET Olympics in terms of which group can out-cheat the other group at Vegas. And so this is one of the things they do as a sporting event, believe it or not. And again, it sounds so bizarre, but this is the kind of weird stuff that I hear.
David, how do I sign Ben up for that? I gotta get him in there.
Lose a lot of money.
Also, I just want to say thank you for putting my mind at ease. I always knew there was a conspiracy revolved around California farmers markets. I knew it. I knew there had to be. I can go to sleep really well tonight.
No, you're good.
You got to watch out for those daikon roots and those arugula vegetables.
Exactly. I knew those mushrooms were weird.
It's very funny.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and going back to Vegas, I mean, we've heard that too, where a lot of these ETs actually will go to Vegas and they just like hanging out and gambling and seeing what...
I guess that's why what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
I don't think they're allowed by these treaties to snooker normal people. From my understanding, they will have a special event. They will close the casino down, and then you'll have these people in there competing against each other, but not against ordinary folks, because you know they would just devastate people, and they would make so much money that you can't really let them do this amongst ordinary people, even if they look like us and we wouldn't be able to tell them apart from others. They only really do this as these sort of special functions where they're only working against their own people and others like them in this sort of psychic Olympics.
So, David, on this subject, what do you, like, especially relating to the fire, getting back to the fires and the Centaurians, how would President Trump, do you think they know about what's going on here?
I don't know. I mean, that's part of why I wanted to write this article, which I'm still developing. I'm getting close to being finished with it now. Is that I don't know if Trump and his administration even know about the Centaurians, honestly. And the reason why I say this is Pete Peterson, who was, again, called Dr. Do by Reagan and Cheney and Rumsfeld, that whole Reagan administration, he was their #1 technology advisor. He had an amazing ability to invent interesting stuff. His grandfather was Nikola Tesla's lab assistant. He learned all the Tesla patents and the secret technology, and they trained him with a different high-level black ops scientist every year, 6 months training, 6 months internship, for like years of his life. So he has the equivalent of like multiple PhDs. And he invented a whole lot of really amazing classified stuff, because once you understand the technology that well, it dramatically opens up all kinds of new doors in terms of material science, in terms of computer technology, in terms of understanding chemistry, understanding how materials blend. You know, there's certain things he'd talk about all the time, like, you know, gallium arsenide and bismuth and all kinds of weird stuff. So regarding the Centaurians and what Pete told me about them, this is something that isn't necessarily going to be given to the President of the United States. The President of the United States is only at a certain level of classification, and you don't really learn most of what there is to know about the secret space program until you're at cosmic clearance, and cosmic is 35 levels of need to know above the President of the United States. What I did hear from Pete was that Trump will get cosmic clearance, but that they wait until you've been in office for 2.5 years. And that hasn't happened yet. That's next July. So part of what we have to do now is I wanted to communicate this to the Alliance through public media to let them know, if they didn't know, I can prove, if they wanted to bring me in and have me, you know, play these tapes to them confidentially, I can prove that we've been talking about Paradise since 2007, and that I knew that this was the most important town in America for extraterrestrial human authorized immigration. And so something real fishy is going on here, and I highly suspect that Centaurians had decided they were going to come forward, introduce themselves to us. We get sort of the gentle disclosure where the first group that we meet are people that don't really look any different, but then they take the contact lens off and, oh my God, he's got a purple eye, is that true? You know, and then doctors have to confirm it. They take the plate off, you see the little bumps on the bottom of their teeth. Oh my God, their teeth are different. Is this a joke? Did they sculpt it with a dentist? What's going on? With this fire now, it's like somebody sent them a message, because this thing's way too weird. We've never seen a fire like this before. And then for it to happen right after the mass shooting, which is clearly a setup, it's like the cabal wanted you to know that they did this on purpose. And they wanted to threaten extraterrestrial humans to make them afraid of coming forward. But I can tell you, if I understand anything about these people, and myself included, we will not be intimidated. We will not be silenced. Disclosure will not be stopped. We will take the losses, and we are going to move forward, and we are going to make this thing happen no matter what.
Coming soon, part 2 of our exclusive interview with David Wilcock, where he reveals what really happened on 9/11, more revelations about the Alliance, and further investigations into the deep state. So be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single moment from the Edge of Wonder.